Next on the show, we are a bit late for this interview. We were meant to be talking to Bronwyn at 12 o'clock. Bronwyn Williams is a futurist, economist, and business trends analyst. And I also think she's a partner at Flux Trends. And we're going to talk to her about the changing world under COVID-19 and when, how did they, Flux Trends, how did they, what were the mechanisms in place to assist them in being the futurists that they are, and to analyze and to tell us what's coming and how we prepare ourselves in this world of COVID. Bronwyn, good morning, or good afternoon rather. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Lovely to have you here. And my word, you guys have been busy throughout lockdown. I mean, I couldn't believe I'm on your mail list and all the posts that were coming through. And I thought, gee whiz, But it was also a breath of fresh air, and also knowing that there was some sense of sanity in all of the madness in the lockdown that was happening around us.
Yeah, hopefully that's what we are able to do. As trained analysts and as futurists, we do work in the space of trying to give people clarity as to the direction the world is heading in, and to hopefully buy our readers and our clients just a little bit of time so they can be more proactive and less reactive, particularly in times of fast-paced change. I know that's very much a cliche, but I think that this world has changed, particularly in 2020. So I think that a lot of people have realized the value of looking ahead and perhaps anticipating some of the problems and some of the opportunities that are emerging in the world around us, so that when crises do happen and unforeseen circumstances do materialize, we've got a bit of an understanding on what we can do in those different contexts, so that we are that little bit more prepared.
Now, Bronwyn, no one saw this coming. No one saw COVID-19 happening, not only in South Africa, but globally. That's the one issue. And then also in terms of moving forward, as far as COVID is concerned, our lives literally came to a standstill. How do we pick up and move forward? That's COVID-19 that's had this impact on our lives. Prior to that, I know we were all talking 4IR. We were all worried about 4IR, how we need to be reinventing ourselves. And that was the buzzword last year. And now that's just kind of almost been pushed on the wayside, and we're now talking COVID and how we need to possibly reinvent ourselves for COVID. And the frightening thing is the number of jobs that have been lost and the number of small enterprises that have closed down.
Yes, absolutely. So I think my first comment on that would be that no, we couldn't predict that the pandemic was going to happen this year, and we couldn't predict how it's being rolled out from sort of a policy point of view or from the actual ways the virus has progressed across the world. But that's not to say that no one was prepared for this. In fact, there's very strong evidence, and it's just factual evidence actually, that some countries were prepared. They did have pandemic plans in place, and some companies that did have a bit more foresight even had things like pandemic insurance in place. So Wimbledon is one such event that actually was thinking about these things, because it's not an unforeseen risk. It's something that we've always known about. We've always had to deal with health crises as humans over history. But we don't tend to want to think about really big challenges when we've got so much to deal with in our day-to-day lives. That brings me to the next point, which is, of course, saying that there were a lot of things going on before this happened. You mentioned the whole thing of automation and how jobs are at risk from increasing technology, or the 4IR, whatever you want to call it. And we also had serious economic challenges that weren't even related to 4IR here in South Africa. I mean, we went into junk status the same week that we went into lockdown, and we didn't get to the junk status point because of COVID. It was something that we had been working towards. And of course, you can work towards good things as well as bad things for some years now. And that really brings me to the third point that can sort of relate to what you've been saying. And that is that times of crises, when they converge, as what has happened this year, tend to accelerate underlying trends rather than to create new ones. And that can be both a good thing and a bad thing. Because what it really means is those trends that were in play get accelerated and get amplified. But it also means that ideas that we've had lying around, so ideas that have been planted and seeded into popular consciousness, that perhaps have been ignored because they were too big and audacious or because they were too early, get breathing space and get a chance to actually start to grow and to flourish and to actually get adopted. Even things that were seen to be quite impossible just a couple of months ago suddenly become possible in times of crisis. So once again, this can be seen from both a positive point of view and perhaps a bit more of a sort of scary point of view. So to start with the more sort of bad news, the ideas that have been lying around that can perhaps, compound our woes in a society that has high unemployment, that isn't very constrained economic conditions. The one would be, of course, the accelerated adoption of technology, which of course comes with great efficiencies, but also means that in the short run, at least, a lot of people then stand to lose their jobs. So you can look at automation and how it's been accelerated this year for two reasons. One, for cost implications, because obviously automating tasks can save business owners and employers money. So there's an increased incentive to accelerate the adoption of labor-saving technologies. And at the same time, there's also demand for those labor-saving technologies because they allow us to run our economies on a more contactless basis, which is obviously good for reducing the flow of real physical threats, such as the virus itself that we have been dealing with. So you can see once again how that underlying trend has been accelerated through time. From a more sort of utopian point of view, we can also look at what's happened with some of the more audacious and ambitious sort of socially orientated economic goals and how they have been adopted by governments who just a few months ago would have said they were absolutely politically impossible. So I can give two examples there. One would be how universal basic income is suddenly being talked about seriously across governments across the world. So on everything from sort of helicopter money drops going out in the US and the UK, right through to vast expansions of our social grants program here in South Africa, they can all be seen as sort of different variants pointing to how these concepts of a living wage for everyone funded by the public fiscus are suddenly being debated at very high levels to be something that could actually be rolled out within our lifetimes. The other example there of an economic idea that's time has come and been accelerated, brought forward quite a lot, would be the adoption of degrowth or donut economics. So this is an economic model that's already been adopted by Amsterdam and Holland, and other governments are taking it very, very seriously. And what it really means is that policymakers are focusing not on growth, which has, of course, been the focus of policymakers for most of Western civilization's sort of economic policy days, but rather towards sustainability. So donut economics says that we should be focusing all of our policies, both as businesses and as societies, within two sort of rings of a donut. So a donut has two rings, it's got an inner ring and an outer ring. And the inner ring relates to a social security safety net or a floor below which no one's living standards should drop. So it's all those sort of basic human development indicators that the World Economic Forum and the UN have been working towards for a very long time. So it has to not fall below the floor. But a donut's also got a second ring, the outer ring, and that refers to our planetary boundaries. So our natural resource constraints. It refers to not overshooting resource usage of scarce resources and also not overshooting polluting those resources or overfilling what we call our resource sinks to make sure that we're building a sustainable and more equitable economy. And it's quite a radical idea because shifting from growth as a metric of societal success to sustainability is quite a different way of looking at the world. And hopefully those examples help your listeners understand how in times of crisis, seemingly impossible ideas for both better or for worse get breathing space and oxygen to actually grow and filter through into our popular consciousness and into our real lives.
There's so much more that I do want to talk to you about, but I've just been told that our next guest has very limited time because she's going to have to get onto a plane to Cape Town. But two things I do want to ask you, very especially, which Flux Trends talks about as well, but the Black Lives Matter campaign, what this means for the future and Gen Z. Very interesting. How is our worldview going to change post this whole Black Lives Matter initiative or the stance that people around the world has taken?
Yeah, absolutely. The Black Lives Matter movement is just one of many big social mass movements that have been taken from the sort of the ground up of citizens saying that they're no longer prepared to tolerate different inefficiencies and different unfairnesses base in our system. So it actually ties in quite a lot with that whole sort of donut economics, universal basic income thinking, which is more about social justice and more distributed social justice through all elements of society. And they really have shifted popular consciousness. In fact, there's quite a good argument to be made that those protests have actually shifted the outcomes of the US election, and does serve as a bellwether to show that society is just no longer prepared to tolerate things that have been swept under the rug. So we should take this very, very seriously as societies and as businesses, to say that 2020 really is a year of reckoning with what is broken in our society on a social level, on an economic level, whatever it can be, and being very, very conscious about the fact that we can't just kick the can of all these undercurrents of unrest and unhappiness further down the road, because we're going to end up with much bigger, much more complicated problems to solve. So we have to address this. We have to actually sort of clean out our social wounds, for whatever that might be, and we have to reckon with the past, and we have to make sure that we are healing the underlying cause rather than just sort of papering over the problems. So hopefully that's another thing to look forward to next year, to building things better, as they say, going forward.
What's also caught my eye was the fact that you people spoke about plastic pollution. It's been around for a very, very long time. There must be a very specific reason for flux trends to be focusing on them, but let's leave that for another program. I would love to have you back on air again. And you can also tell Dion Chang from me. I interviewed him many years ago, and it's stuck. That thought has stuck in my mind now that we see the problem with the Nile River and the problem in Sudan and North Africa, and people wanting to dam up the Nile River. And way back, it must have been about four years perhaps ago, that Dion said on one of my programs that our future wars are not going to be fought over oil and other resources. They're going to be fought over water. And he predicted absolutely correctly. So pass that on to him from me. But before I let you go, there's something new that Flux Trends have coined, and that is postalgia. What's that all about?
Yeah, so postalgia is a term that was coined by the science fiction writer William Gibson. It was just sort of a footnote in one of his interviews, but we really picked it up because I think it explains so much as to what we are feeling right now as societies and as individuals. And postalgia is it's similar to nostalgia. So nostalgia is a sort of hankering after the past and the world that was. Postalgia is a little bit different in that it really speaks to the fact that for many people that feel trapped in constrained economic times and for much shortened horizons, feel that today is as good as it gets. So it's a scarcity mindset, thinking that the future is going to be worse than the present, so we must hang on to what we have right now. And it's very destructive because it encourages selfish and short-sighted behavior, which is obviously not good from a social or economic or environmental sustainability perspective.
Absolutely.
So we've been writing quite a lot about why we are stuck in this sort of postalgia, shrunk horizons mindset, and what we can do as organizations and societies to break out of that and become excited about future possibilities. Because sustainability doesn't have to mean limited growth in the future. It can actually mean doing more with less, which is, of course, the very definition of progress. So we hope that we're able to get people to think a bit more optimistically and a bit more proactively, once again, about what could be coming.
We'll have to leave it there, but love to talk to you again, possibly before the end of the year or early in the new year. Thank you so very much. And you guys at Flux Trends continue doing the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for inviting me. Goodbye.
It's 12:35 and let's get ready for our next interview. That is with the author, Thakira Mohammed.